Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 7 of Citizen Developer, in which we would be discussing about file and folder automation and what is Project Notebook and how and why do we use it. So, what is file and folder automation? So, file automation or folder automation refers to the automation of tasks that the user performs with file and folders. So, anything and everything that we do using file and folders on our computer, such as creating the file, copying, organizing a local drive, organizing a shared drive, or renaming the files and folders, and all those stuff actually comes under file and folder task. And when we automate that, that becomes file and folder automation. So an important thing to note here that as we've seen previously, that when we have to use Excel or when we have to use a Word document, or even when we have to use a PowerPoint, we actually use a resource that we are using this particular resource. And then inside that container, we perform all the tasks associated with it. Whereas with file and folder automation, it doesn't require a resource for us to utilize the file and folder activities unless we are using Excel file and Word file along with it. So if we are just performing file and folder automation, we need not to use a resource to actually utilize those activities. But if we are combining it with, say, an Excel or with a Word, so we have to use Excel resource or Word resource. So this is file and folder automation, that all those tasks that we perform while we are playing around with files and folders constitutes the file and folder automation. Now let's see what all do we can actually achieve using file and folder automation. So to name few, we have copy file, move file, we have renaming of the files, we have delete files. So there are scenarios wherein, you're supposed to quarterly or monthly clear off the files or create backup of it. The shared drive may contain GBs and TBs of data, and you have to put certain criteria and clear the files or create backup so that there is actually space on the shared drive. Then getting file and folder information could be size, when was it created, who created it, the full path, the modification date, all such information. And if suppose you had to, actually see that, okay, if the file was recently modified, then do not delete it. But if the file has not been modified in last 1 month, then delete it. So all these criteria when applied, and you'll have to do it manually, like see, even if there are 100 files and you have to actually go and check the modification date of each file one by one, and then decide that whether you want to delete it or not, is going to take a lot of time. But with file and folder automation, it can be done within seconds. Then we have for each file and folder, which is basically a looping activity. So if you have thousands of files and you have to, iterate over one file at a time, get certain information out of it, and accordingly take a call on what action has to be performed. In such scenarios, for each file in folder activity can be utilized. Then if you want to create a certain file and folder, then there's a dedicated activity for it. If you want to read into a particular file, or if you want to read from a particular file or write into a particular file, for that also a dedicated set of activities are there. So all that we have discussed till now about file and folder automation, we would also be seeing its practical implementation. But before that, let's also have a glimpse of what is Project Notebook. So this is something new, like you would not have heard about it because this term is particular to Studio X. Like you have heard about Word, you have heard about Excel, you have heard about file and folder, because that you usually use in your daily life. But Project Notebook is something which is particular and specific to Studio X. But how it can be utilized in our automation is what we're going to see and what we're going to focus. So first and foremost, what is Project Notebook? So it is a space where different operations can be performed during execution time. So while a robot is running, if we have to do any sort of calculations or any sort of changes or modification, such as conversion of the date to different format or extraction of several values from a text, or you can say get the extension of the file separate, get the folder path separate, get the file name separate, or trim the white spaces from a particular name. So all this can be achieved using Project Notebook, and it acts while on the run, which is during the execution time. So under the design tab, the fourth icon that you see here is Project Notebook. and we'll see how you utilize it. So anytime when you create any process, project notebooks comes by default with all the process that you create. It is up to you how you want to utilize it, but there's a default project notebook that gets created with every project that you create. So it has basically 5 sheets, namely date sheet, text sheet, file sheet, number sheet, and scratchpad sheet. So what is unique and very powerful about project notebook is that it is by default populated with a predefined set of formulas, okay, which can involve date, text, number, or file. So I'll rather show you how the project notebook looks like. So see, any project that we create, there's a project notebook that comes with it. Okay. And you can also, access it from here, that you click on open notebook. Now, as of now, for me, I've already opened it. So I get this. So if I close this and I go and I open the notebook, so it will open the project notebook for me. So here is the project notebook. So the first is, you can say, a detailing of what is project notebook. So it's like an introduction to it. Then the second, we have date. Okay. And now in the date, what you can see is that an input date is given. So it calculates the number of days, date plus a certain number of days. So suppose you have given 7 days, you have to add in 27th February. So you'll get 6th of March. Then if you want to only add working days, then you get that, which means you skip the weekend. Then the date format, then what is today's date, then what is last week's date, what is last month date, what is first or last business day of a particular month. So you have to give this input and you can get the output in all these formats. Okay. The text, the separator, the format, which is year, month, and date. Then the first token, second token, like this, these are the calculated values, what are being calculated. The first token becomes your year. The second token becomes your day, month. The third token becomes the date, nth day, which is 31st day of the month, and so on and so forth. Similarly, when you go on the text file, so this is the input you give, then you get trimmed. So if there's any, white space in the beginning or at the end, it gets trimmed. Then you get the length, then you get it uppercase, then lowercase. Then what do you want to search? You want to search John and you want to replace it with Mary. So it becomes Mary C. Doe. Okay. If you want to check that whether a particular thing, like suppose John C. Doe contains a certain word, say John C. Doe contains Stark, which is false because in that particular name, Stark is not there. Okay. What is the first name? What is the last name? So for all this, formula is already written. Okay. So if you want to get anything out of it, you can simply utilize this notebook and we'll see how do you actually utilize it. So also one important thing to note here is that project notebook doesn't have to be used alongside a dedicated resource, but rather it acts as a standalone feature for your operation. Okay. So this means you can benefit from it in various automation scenarios, which are having different resources. Say you're using Excel also, you're using Word also. So it doesn't require you to use a dedicated resource for it because it's like an inbuilt thing that you get with every project that you create. So you can utilize it in different ways to make your automation easy, to get complicated things out of it very easily. So the date sheet I showed you that it will come in handy with you, and it would be the first sheet after the introduction sheet. So for example, you need to add current date to specific files, or you want to add some number of working days to a particular date. So all that can be done using the date sheet very easily. Then we have text sheet, which is also a very versatile sheet that allows you to trim, replace, or extract different pieces of text from file. Then we have number sheet. So the number sheet can be used to perform certain operations involving number, such as cleaning up any unwanted space before or after a number, or retrieving an integer part of it. Okay. Or, you set in that you want 2 decimal places or 3 decimal places. What is the group separator? What is the decimal separator? So all these things you can get from the number sheet. Then we have file sheet. So formulas within file sheet, they help you to manipulate the files you're working with. which means you can get the file name, you can even get the path, you can get the file name without extension, then you can get the extension. Then we have Scratchpad sheet, which is actually a blank canvas where you can bring in your own formulas. So now all these formulas were already inbuilt, but you can also get your own formulas that are essential for your automation project. And you'll have the freedom to manipulate it the way you want it, depending on your automation needs. Okay, so this is a glimpse of what is Project Notebook. We'll be seeing it later, then how do we utilize it. We also have an option to configure the notebook, like we add the notebook file, we can give it a name for later use. Then we can make it password protected. So we'll have an access password using which you can only read it, and then you'll have an editing password with which you can also edit it. Now, all that we have discussed, let's just see the practical implementation of the same as well. So we'll be first seeing the moving and renaming of files, which we would be seeing using Project Notebook. So all that we have discussed, we would also be seeing it practically in front of us. So as you can see, there are 5 invoices lying in here, and there is a Parker Industries client empty folder. Okay. So our job would be that with each file, we edit its name, and then we add Parker Industries client, and then we add today's date. Now this can also be achieved using renaming of the files or in some other ways, but we would be achieving this using Project Notebook. Okay, so that is the difference. Now that we have here 5 invoices, it could be 500 as well. And now that we have to iterate one by one onto each invoice name and actually edit its name. So you know which particular this thing we are going to use, activity. So first of all, that we have to iterate on each file one by one. We're going to use for each file in folder. So let's get back here. So the first thing that we're going to use is for each file in folder. Now, what is the folder that we want to iterate? So let's just navigate, or let me get the name. So this is where all the invoices are present. So let's give it the path where it has to iterate. So we'll open a text editor and we'll say, okay, here is where the invoices align. Okay, so automatically it made it like inside the project folder only we have the invoices folder. So once we have all the invoices, what we have to do is we have to get its name. What is the name of this particular invoice? Now, here is where we are going to utilize our project notebook. Now, if I open the project notebook to give you a glimpse of how are we going to utilize it. So let the project notebook open. So we'll have a file section here, as you see. What we are supposed to do is that there's a file name. Okay, so we're going to write our file name here. So as of now, it is invoice5.pdf, but our aim is that one by one we write the file name in here. Okay, so that is what we're going to do. And for that, we're going to use a write cell. Okay, so we'll use write cell. And now that you see that though we are writing cell, which means it is an Excel operation, but because we will be utilizing Project Notebook, we need not to specifically mention or get an Excel resource, because this time here we are not utilizing any normal Excel, whereas we are utilizing the Project Notebook. So this is the main difference that I was telling you, that it does not require a separate resource to be used. So what is that we want to write? We want to write the current file and we want to write the full path. And where do we want to write it? We want to write it inside notebook, inside file sheet. And where do we want to write it? Full file name is where we want to write it, which means here we are going to write it. Full file name, you can see here, it's the name. Then what do we want out of it is this is something that would be written by itself, and you're gonna add Parker Industries. Okay, so I'll show you what we are going to write it. So now instead of underscore, we can even have hyphen, and we'll say Parker Industries. Okay, then we'll give an hyphen again and then close the double quotes. And then we're going to introduce the date, which is YY. And as you type in half, the other would come by itself here. And from where did it come? So you can see here it is there, YYMMDD. Okay, so this is the cell name. And from here only it came in here. Okay. So in the file sheet, we are even utilizing the date sheet, and combining these two, we would be utilizing it in our this thing solution. Okay, so we wrote it that, okay, we want to write it here. And where do we want to write it? So we want to write the full path. And where do we want to write it? We have already seen. Now what we want to do is we also want to move the file. Okay. Now from where do we want to move the file? So we want to move the file from current file folder. Okay. And not just the folder, I think current file full path, which would include everything. Where do we want to move it? So we want to move it. Okay, let me just open a notepad to show. Okay, so we'll have a folder path. Okay, so first let's have the folder path. So current file folder. Let's open the text editor now. After folder path, so here is the folder path. Inside the folder path, we have Parker Industries as well. So let's copy this thing. Okay, let's go back. Let's paste it. Okay, so we have come inside Parker Industries client. So here is where we want to move it. Okay. Let's give it a run and see how does it goes. Okay, so we will save it because we have done a change of replacing the underscore with the hyphen. And now let's give it a run. Okay, so it has stopped. Let's go and see. Okay, it did move it, but it did not rename it. Okay, and why did it not rename it? Okay, so it did not rename it because we did not mention. So we gave the full path and then we did not mention the name. So it moved it with the same name. Now, if you want to, change in the name as well. So we'll go to notebook, we'll go to file sheet, and then we have file name, no extension is okay. So see, let me open the notebook and show. Let's open the notebook to the file sheet. Okay, so where is our name? So our name is in file name, no extension. Okay, so we're gonna utilize this particular thing to actually change the name of the file, because as of now it did move the file, but it moved it with the same name. So we'll go to notebook, file sheet, file name, no extension. And after that, we'll have to append a .pdf extension to it. And now if we give it a run, so let's see that this time, what would be the name inside the Parker Industries client. Now, if we go back, then we see everything has been done correctly. The invoice name has in hyphen, then Parker Industries, then hyphen, and then today's date, which is 27 February. Okay, so this is how we did file and folder automation utilizing the project notebook along with it. So now let's move on to the next activity where we would be seeing a bit more of file and folder automation. So I'll walk you through the problem statement that we would be going to implement. So here you can see that there are n number of files of different type. We have picture files, which can be PNG, JPG. Then we have Excel files, then we have PDF files, and then we have presentation file as well. So what we're going to do, we will pick up one file from here. Inside the sorted folder, we'll create segregated folders, separate folders for images, presentations, Excel, and one-page document. And we will move the files in here. So now that we have to iterate one by one over each file, what we would be doing is we would be using for each file and folder as we just saw. Where do we want to iterate it? So we want to iterate it inside the files folder. So let's copy the path. Let's go back in here, open this thing in text editor and paste the folder path where we want to iterate. Now, once we iterate it, what are we going to do? We have to actually look for the extension of the file. And with the extension, we would be identifying that to which particular folder we want to move it. Okay. Now, to actually get to know the extension, as we just saw, previously as well that there's a file sheet in the project notebook. And in that file sheet, if we paste the full path here, we actually get the extension from here. So that is what we're going to do. We would be using a right cell. So let's use a right cell. Okay. Inside the right cell, we'll have to write the current file full path. Okay. And where do we want to write it? Inside the notebook, in the file sheet, full file name as an input we want to give. Once we give it, we'll have a lot of extensions. So we're going to use the switch activity. What would be our expression is that we'll go to notebook, file, and then file name extension. Okay. And with the extension, we are going to categorize each file. So suppose if it's a PNG file, what we're going to do is we'll first see that inside the sorted folder, we even have a folder for pictures or we do not have a folder. So we will be checking that whether folder exists or it doesn't exist. Okay. So let's not navigate in from here. Instead, we'll go inside the sorted folder. And here we would be checking that whether there is an image folder or there is no image folder. So what would be the folder path? The folder path would be this. Okay. And we would be saving it inside a save for later use variable, which we will name as image exist, which means image folder exists or not. Now we will check that if the folder exists, because for first run, the folder may not exist, but later the folder may exist. And we are going to use a saved value, which is image exist. So now if the image exists, all that we have to do is we have to move the file. Okay. So we will be using a move file activity. From where do we want to move the file? So we have current file full path. From here, we want to move the file. And to where do we want to move the file? So we want to move the file. So we can copy it from here only. So this is the path we are checking, right? And this is where we would actually be moving. Okay, so one thing to note here, inside the sorted folder, we'll have an images folder separately. So that is what we're going to check. So if that particular folder exists, okay, so we're going to move it inside that folder. What would be the name of a file? So we can pick it up from here itself, current file. We can have the file name, which would be without extension. We'll have a dot in here, and then we would also want to have the extension. So file name file, and then we can also have the extension. So here is where we want to move it. Now, if the folder does not exist, so the only added step we would be doing, we would definitely be moving the file, but we would also have to create the folder before we move it. Because in this particular scenario, the folder does not exist. What would be the folder name? Folder name would be the one that we're actually checking that whether this exists or not. So let's copy it and we'll just simply paste it here. Text editor, we'll paste it. Okay. Now what would this thing do? Let's just, first run it and see. So what will this particular thing do? It will pick up all PNG files from here and would move it in the sorted folder. Okay. So let me close the project notebook. If I don't close the project notebook before running the program, and if my program is actually utilizing the project notebook, it will throw me an error. So now let's run this thing. We should have an images folder inside the sorted folder, and all the PNG files should be moved from the files folder to here. Okay. Now that the execution has stopped, let's go and see. So we have images file here. So we have 5 images here. If we go back to files folder, now there are no image folder here. Okay. So the same thing we can do even for the PDF file. All that we have to do is, let's just close this if, okay. Let me just copy this entire thing. Okay. And I'm going to create another case named say PDF. Okay. I will simply check. Okay. So I will first simply check that whether the folder exists or not. I'll also copy the if and then do some modification inside it. Okay. Now, yeah, so here is our if. Now this time, instead of images folder, we'll have to check that whether, say I name it PDF documents. Okay. So now this becomes that I'll check for the PDF documents folder inside it. And then not an image exist. I'll have to save it into a different, you can say this thing, different variable. So save for later use, and I'll name it PDF folder. Okay. And I'll be utilizing the same value over here. So I'll use the saved value PDF folder this time. Okay. Now, if the folder exists, I'll replace, I will have to move it inside PDF documents. So I'll replace this thing, just the path. Okay. I would also be replacing the path here because this time we'll have to create a PDF folder. Okay, so I'll open text and I'll simply replace it with PDF documents. Similar thing has to be done in here. So I'll open the text editor and I'll remove this thing with PDF documents. Now, if I run this particular thing, all the PDF documents would be picked up from here and would be moved to a different folder inside the sorted folder. So now if we go back to sorted folder, a folder would be created here named PDF documents. You just saw it was created. And now it's going to move all the files that had PDF extension inside PDF document. Here we go. So this is how we can utilize file and folder automation and project notebook together to actually organize our drive within seconds. So that was all for this particular episode of file and folder automation in project notebook. I hope it was helpful. I'll see you in the next video soon, where we will be covering another interesting topic related to become a citizen developer. Till then, stay tuned and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.